we say Gen Z is the most empathetic and psychologically minded generation yet, but they're the most depressed and anxious generation that we've ever seen. They have all this awareness of how things could be, how to have empathy, how to connect with people, but yet they're not able to actually do it because we haven't set up a system that allows for effective connectedness. In fact, they're alone in their room on their phone. That's not connecting. And so when we think about Promly and we say, well, what's going to make us different? Well, we say, well, how do we impact and empower connectedness among teenagers in a healthy way?
Welcome to TAD Voices. I'm Nick.
And I'm Lawson. And we're friends and former teammates who are here to talk about mental health.
We are by no means experts in this field, nor is this a substitute for professional help, but we can promise open and vulnerable conversations that highlight the strength of some amazing people who have decided to share their story with us.
Talk, share, help. And thanks for listening. We now welcome to the podcast a psychotherapist with over 20 years of experience. She is currently a clinical social worker in Morristown, New Jersey, and is also the CEO and founder of Promly, a new and safer social networking app for adolescents, which we are so excited to learn more about today. Welcome to TAD Voices, Dr. Jen Libby.
Hi, nice to see you guys.
Jen, is it Dr. Jen or Jen?
Just Jen.
Okay. Jen, it's great to have you on. How have you been doing lately?
Well, let's say this, between pandemics and full moons, the mental health industry is booming, we'll say. So very busy. We're very busy right now.
Now, the first question that we kind of want to tackle here is really just a little bit more about, you getting started out and kind of, what got you on this path of really wanting to become a psychotherapist?
Well, in terms of becoming a psychotherapist, I would say an interesting part of my history is that I grew up in a home where my dad was he was a minister, and my parents lived in a very rural area. And so before my dad went back to school for psychology, my parents had a tendency to take anybody that came to the church for mental health help and just invite them to our house to live. And so as a kid, I grew up with, really getting to know a lot of different people in a lot of different sometimes crisis situations, sometimes addiction. So, it's not the typical model that we might recommend for parents with small children. But I will say, at a very young age, I learned that, people can come from all walks of life, and everybody kind of presents with some sort of mental health struggle somewhere along the way. Back when he decided to take a sabbatical and go back to school for a little bit to learn more about psychology, just not feeling like anything in religion had prepared him for what he was seeing in that, with people presenting with real clinical symptoms. He just didn't know how to treat them. So, while he went back to school, I was probably in junior high, and I was fascinated by everything that he was learning, from the psych testing to, the research that he was doing. We talk about it at dinner. And so that really fueled my interest in psychology, because it helped me to understand sometimes the experience of that I had watching people in our home with certain struggles that they had. So at a very young age, I said, oh, you know what I'm going to be is a therapist. I did have a little stint of wanting to be a stunt woman when I was a sophomore in high school. That was a little bit short-lived because I really don't think my coordination's that good. So I'm glad, I picked the path of therapy.
That's great to hear. And then I'd like to hear a little bit more sort of about your early career, and then obviously jumping into Promly and what prompted you to head in that direction.
Sure. I always loved, I kind of saw myself as somebody who would work with adolescents. And so very soon on, I worked at Boston Public Schools in one of their special ed programs. Prior to that, I was a victim advocate in the Rockingham County Attorney's Office. And then after that, this is when I was in graduate school and doing different internships. I actually worked in secure treatment for juvenile sex offenders, gang offenders, and young women prostitutes. And so I, had kind of a wealth of experience with teenagers, and certainly teenagers who came from a variety of struggles. I also then worked at Beth Israel, another internship in inpatient psychiatry and outpatient psychiatry, and then went on to actually work in the school system, and then went on to be an assistant principal up in Massachusetts at another special ed school. all the while knowing that I wanted to do private practice eventually. So as soon as I was really able to do private practice, I did, even if it was a little bit part-time while I was working in the school system. Ironically, I, started in Massachusetts and then I landed in New Jersey, mostly because my husband and I had a coin toss as to where we were going to land. He was in New Jersey and I was in Massachusetts, and I clearly lost the coin toss, but I'm very grateful for that, in that I was able to come to Morristown and really not know anybody and set up a practice pretty quickly, and, learn that there's just a lot of need around here. It's certainly, I would say, it's very busy from a mental health standpoint, and certainly from somebody who specializes with adolescents. And I've been fortunate for that. I've loved my practice. I love my clients. I think they certainly feel that from me. I love the work that I do. I love inspiring change in people. I feel so blessed to even have the opportunity to meet my clients. It takes a lot for a kid to come in and trust somebody, and I'm just so grateful for that experience. I will say, when I came to Morristown in 2003, things were going okay. And I was always aware of teen suicide in general, but between about 2003 to 2009, in a 6-year period, what I noticed is that I heard about teen suicides, but I just didn't hear about it as much as we do now. So let's say in the 6-year period, I heard about 3 teen suicides in the general geographic area of where I see kids. Between 2009 and 2019, there was a dramatic increase in what I was just hearing about in, let's say we draw a radius around my office of, 35 miles, we'll say, and, where I'd hear about teen suicide. So from that 10-year period, we had anywhere between 6 and 9 teen suicides every single year, from 2009, 10, 11, all the way to 2019. And as we fast forward now, we're, in 2020, from January 1st to today, we're at 14 teen suicides to date right now. The majority of the suicides that we were seeing were actually even before the pandemic. I think, we've had, I would say, an increase as a result of the pandemic, but we were at, I think in February, we were at maybe 9 for the year, and we hadn't even gotten through 2 months of the year. And it's hard to know exactly what is, I don't think there's one thing that we could put our finger on, let's say. But what I do know is that, well, let's say this. The CDC reports, and you've heard the statistic, I'm sure, but 5,400 kids every single day in the United States of America between grades 7 and 12 try to commit suicide. That was based on a 2017 statistic. The CDC really can't get the information quick enough, let's say, to have real-time information about what's actually happening with suicide. So we're going to hear about these statistics, but not for another couple of years. The 2017 statistics were huge, and that's really what prompted a lot of change and focus on teen suicide in general. That's where you heard the statistics, suicides become the second leading cause of death for teenagers. It starts to become more in the back of people's heads. But what I find, certainly around here, is I don't really know of a kid who, A, hasn't struggled with suicidal ideation, or B, hasn't had a friend that they've known has been suicidal. In, the clients that I treat, the kids that I talk to, the interns that I have, it's just become almost, it's a normal part of development in some ways, as crazy as that sounds. It's been, suicide's such a part of people's thinking, more so than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit, that you don't necessarily know, one factor that plays into it, but, you could take home life, you could take, school life, extracurriculars, relationships with friends, other, friends' parents, anything like that. But, obviously with Promly, you've hopefully set up a safe space for these conversations to occur for those individuals that have access to therapy and resources, but probably mostly for those who don't, correct?
Right. One of the things we look at, and this is, it's kind of funny because we say, well, why come up with a social networking app? Like, that's crazy. We hate social networking. And don't we think that social networking is, destroying our society? Isn't this like the worst thing that we could think about? I guess what I would say is, it's one of these things. The first rule of therapy, whenever you go to therapy school, the first thing they teach you is to start where your client's at. And if I come in as a therapist and I say, you know what, I'm gonna impart a lot of information on this kid. I'm gonna tell him how to do life. That's great. That kid doesn't really care. Doesn't care anything about what I have to say unless I truly learn to connect with that kid wherever they're at, or that adult wherever they're at. What I know is that if we don't connect with kids at the level that they're at, be it most kids are on social media. We say 90 whatever percent of kids, are using social media on a regular basis. So if I don't kind of learn to use their language, I really lose them. One of the things that we see is that there's like a million mental health apps. I'm constantly telling the kids, for years I've been saying, oh, try this new app. It's so great. You'll love it. It's whatever. We know that kids don't use mental health apps. It's just not as interesting as TikTok, or it's not as interesting as Snapchat. So, go ahead, they'll download the app. They say even 24% of teenagers will download a health app, but only 4% will ever even use the app one time. So when we looked at saying, okay, well, what are we going to do to create change? Like, how can we actually, get in there and make a change? Part of it is saying, okay, well, what do kids like? Well, kids like social media. Well, then how can we do something more effective in the social media realm? When you say, okay, well, what's one reason, and I say, suicide is a thing that I'm passionate about. I really want to be able to prevent teen suicide. I see a lot of, things that are out there that are, crisis-based, which are amazing and really great resources, but strategically, it's like, well, let's get ahead of the crisis. Let's do something that teaches kids how to connect in a really basic way. What I find, the biggest influencer of suicide is when kids feel disconnected. And right now, I think there was some statistic, 57% of kids, despite, having constant access to social networking, feel disconnected on a day-to-day basis. And I find that my clients, we say Gen Z is the most empathetic and psychologically minded generation yet, but they're the most depressed and anxious generation that we've ever seen. They have all this awareness of how things could be, how to have empathy, how to connect with people, but yet they're not able to actually do it because we haven't set up a system that allows for effective connectedness. In fact, they're alone in their room on their phone. That's not connecting. And so when we think about Promly and we say, well, what's going to make us different? Well, we say, well, how do we impact and empower connectedness among teenagers in a healthy way? And so, part of what we do is we say, all right, well, we connect kids based on 20 things they want to do before they're 20. I, joke because one of the first assignments that I give any of my clients is 30 things they want to do before they're 30. I'm like, listen, I don't know you at all. Write down 30 things you want to do before you're 30. I don't care if it's like paint your nails red one day. I don't care if you want to win a Nobel Prize. It really doesn't matter. I just want to understand what you want to do in your life before you're 30 years old. And so we've applied that same therapeutic tool to Promly, where we say, let's match kids by 20 things they want to do before they're 20. Let's empower their interests and sort of bucket list activities and really, create spaces for them to get off their phones and get into life and potentially connect with other people, not based on over-edited profile pictures, but on actual fun activities or even impactful volunteering activities or empathic activities or relational activity, things that just mean something to them. And so that's kind of, one of the features of Promly, but it's this idea of getting kids connected because we really truly believe connectedness is the base of human happiness, both connected to yourself and connected to somebody else. And so we're looking for a way to do that in a more meaningful way than just what we see with objectification and over sexualization and, so much focus on the image and not on the actual individual.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, you kind of answered my next question that I was going to have for you. No, it's fine. I think that's a really great point you make. I was really curious about, you mentioned kind of these mainstream apps like TikTok, Instagram, and really my question was, what in creating Promly, what you were trying to avoid from these apps. So I think that's a great answer.
Well, and one of the things that we do at Promly, so, it's kind of like if you can't beat them, join them sort of model, where, again, I'm not going to get the kids off of TikTok. I went onto TikTok the other night. I'm usually not, way into social media. And I said, I'm going to do some market research. 2 hours later, I'm still on TikTok. It's addictive. I mean, it's amazing. I love the dance moves. I love the whole thing. And it's like this wet, there's so many parts of TikTok that I really do love, but my gosh, it is really an addictive like black hole that you get sucked into. So we're not, dumb to think like, oh, we're going to make this great app and it's going to compete with TikTok. So instead, what we've done is we've allowed the user to upload their most used social media. So we give them 3 spaces to upload their Snapchat, their TikTok, their Instagram, whatever their most used social media avenues are, they can actually access that social media within the context of Promly. So they can check on those things, they can display those things. We're not going to fight the machine here, but we're going to try to empower change in a healthier, more balanced way. We're going to take where kids are actually at and then help them to do better.
Right. Yeah. And I think, Nick and I both agree that there's definitely a very high need for an app like that. But I think just maybe stepping back a little bit too, obviously you have tons of experience in the space, but was there a moment where kind of, I don't necessarily want to say an aha moment, but where you're really like, there needs to be something like this out there, or a specific instance that really sparked your kind of your idea, I guess?
Yes. What I've always said to my clients, and I've treated many suicidal teenagers over many years, many suicidal adults, and what I've constantly said for years and years was, I can promise you, your parents will never recover. Your family will never recover if you choose to take your life. And I know that because I've treated grieving parents who've lost children, and I've known they truly, you might put one foot in front of the other, but you truly don't recover ever from the loss of a child. And I've always said that, and I've always believed it, and I've always worked with parents, and I'm saying the truth. In 2015, my son Patrick died. I had a little baby boy. He was 9 months old, and he died from sudden unexplained death syndrome in his sleep in November of that year. And the pain of losing a child is so immense, and people say that, but like when I'm on the receiving end of that and I'm living it, I can tell you that pain never goes away. The loss of a child and that emptiness, all of that stuff that you live with as a parent, it just doesn't go away. And so in sitting with my own grieving my own loss, I'm lucky I have 4 other beautiful girls. But there's never going to be something that fills the void of my son that died. So when I went back to my practice and I'm working with kids and I'm seeing the teen suicide rates dramatically increase, and I have this great practice and I have a wait list and I have no shortage of clients and I'm, considered pretty successful, but in good conscience, I really couldn't sit back and continue to do what I was doing on a smaller scale when I feel like there's so many grieving parents out there. And if we don't do something active and bigger and more responsibly, there will be more grieving parents out there, and there'll be more grieving families, and there'll be more grieving teens, and there'll be more suicide. And, it's like we have to do something more effective than what we're doing right now. Constantly, my clients are telling me, and they say, how did adults let this happen? How did they let us do Snapchat? This is terrible. All my interns will say they're never giving their kids a phone, but they're looking to me and they're saying, Jen, like, how does anybody think this is okay? How is it that YouTube still has the how to tie a noose videos up? Like right now we have a petition up to get YouTube to remove, obviously, the how to tie a noose videos, because we know that they're instrumental in teen suicide. But how, as adults in our society in 2020, does anybody still let that happen? And so out of responsibility to my own clients and out of the grieving of my son, that really was the change agent, which I would say made me think bigger and say, we have to do more. Whatever it takes, we have to do more. And then ironically, I laugh because I always joked about having a promdate.com, mostly because I hear about prom 12 months of the year, and I can't understand how that's possible considering the fact that prom is only one day out of the year, but I'll hear about prom in November and June and all these other times. And so I was joking with a friend in IT about how, like, my gosh, there's a market for prom. Let's just be clear, like, kids love to talk about prom. I hear about it all the time. And as we were brainstorming, I was like, I would never put my name on a sketchy app like that. Like, ew, that's so gross. But then he was like, well, is there a way to make it responsible? Like, is there a way to utilize the market that Prom kind of, brings in, but a way to do it to be able to impact a bigger and better change? And that's really what started Promly. Promly really doesn't have anything to do with prom. Maybe someday we'll be able to incorporate it in some way, but that's really what prompted me to say, yeah, like I think we can do this. Like I think we can really target high school kids, make something exclusive for high school kids, it's safer for high school kids, better, and really thinks through strategically how to give them the mental health support that they need in a place that feels intuitive to them. So that's a long answer, but that's it.
No, that's fantastic. And I think sort of the next question that I'd like to ask is, for our listeners, what would they find on Promly? Like, what would an experience be of somebody who logs into Promly for the first time? What are you hoping that somebody would share? What are you hoping that somebody would see?
It kind of looks like a disco ball in the sense of there's interactive tiles, the disco ball spins, and you can upload your interest to any one of the tiles. You can upload your social media to the designated tiles. But what you would see is first, the ability to make a collage of the 20 things you want to do before you're 20. You can, put your own pictures and videos in there, or you can use the ones that we have. But you can kind of create your own inspiration. And that, inspiration, as our interns and our, focus groups have said, they love that idea of being able to create something, share it, search for other people's interests, but really match with people based on interests and not just pictures, but like, what are they into? What do they want to do? How do they want to affect social change? Things like that. So just to get to know a little bit more about the individual than just what you see in one, profile picture. The other piece of it is that we have a You're Invited section. So we have a You're Invited section for online events, and we even came up with this before COVID. And then You're Invited section for live events, like local to your area. So one of the things that I see is that, kids many times on Friday and Saturday nights are looking at their Snap Mat and they see that they're not invited to a party. And so then they're sitting alone in their room and they're feeling really disconnected. Nobody's getting back to them and they feel really depressed. And so part of our goal is to look around and say, well, what events either can a user create events, pick up soccer, music kind of event, live music, are there volunteer opportunities? Are there things that kids can do really targeted to the weekends and after school that bring people with similar interests together? Can they organize a beach cleanup? Can they do even, a hangout, a poetry slam, whatever, things, similar to like a meetup model, but really geared for high school kids, so that we give them the option of getting off their phones and getting out into doing something, even if it's not with the kids from their exact school. One of the things I noticed is that when I have clients that are really disconnected, they're not, they're having a hard time in school, I will many times connect them with other kids from other schools who I know share similar interests. And, typically it works out pretty well. They say, wow, there's a whole social network out there that really likes me and thinks I'm really great, even if my particular peer group is pushing me out right now. And so our goal is to be able to, fuel those connections, but in a healthy, safe way, not matching people of 4 years apart, only 2 years apart, things like that. Not, making sure that you upload your school ID that matches with your facial recognition so that we don't have pedophiles on the site, things along those lines. The other piece that we have on Promly is we have what's called the Promly Shop. So we know that Gen Z is so entrepreneurial. They always have amazing things that they're selling, doing, buying, inventing. And so we create a place like, where kids can buy and sell what their products are, whatever they are. And really kind of empower them to be their own entrepreneurs and empower their own business and that sort of thing. We also have then the nonprofit arm of Promly is the Promly for You. So that's just like any other tile. It's an interactive tile. You can click on that tile and then, it will give you a few prompts, ask you what's going on, that sort of thing. And then you can make an appointment with a trained adult just to talk. It doesn't have to be a crisis. It doesn't have to be, any big deal. You might want to just vent about something that's going on in your life. We also have access to a lot of different journal prompts, self-evaluations. We try to take all the best things. Hopefully we're going to use talkaboutdepression.org when you guys have that nice checklist that you're coming up with. We want to be able to put that in Promly for you, to be able to give kids access to resources, but beyond just the kind of one-time look at the resources, we want them to be able to connect with trained adults who can meet them where they're at, whatever that is. The other piece of it that I find is that kids sometimes don't remember what Crisis Text Now number is. And so what we've done is created a one-click button to access Crisis Text Now. So they don't have to remember 741-741, text home to, Crisis Text Now. We can build that right into the app so that if there is a crisis, they have the ability to touch that button and get help right away, without ever even leaving the app of Promly. Everything is really built in to be a digital ecosystem that is appealing to kids, it's interesting to kids, but when they need help, it's right there by one button.
I love it. I think for somebody who went to 3 different high schools, I think it would have been great for me to have access to at the time. But, following up with that, sort of maybe playing devil's advocate a little bit is,
sure.
To me, it sounds like I keep coming back to Brene Brown and vulnerability and being uncomfortable in these situations. And a lot of times in my own experience, it took me a while to not bottle it up and push it to the back of my mind and just be like, oh, I'll deal with it later. So for somebody who is having a challenge that day and goes on Promly and sees all these things happening and is just like, I'm not going to do it today. How would you approach those individuals who you hope would be a little bit more vulnerable in those moments and put themselves out there that, hey, I don't know these kids from that school, but this event sounds like something I could be interested in. You know what? I'm going to step out of my comfort zone today and I'm going to go to that event.
Well, that's one of the things that's so cool. So one, I think it's a brilliant idea, but I'll send you what the app actually looks like because it's pretty cool. So it's based on a disco ball, but one of the things that we do with our notifications is we, let's say, light up a disco floor. Actually, and I should also mention this, we have 2 versions of the app. So when you log on, you can either pick the Zen version, which is very chill colors and very like mint green and like very, pastel and chill, or you can pick the disco version, which is much more colorful and like more neon, colors and that sort of thing, recognizing that everybody has a little bit of a different vibe. Some days you might feel like disco, some days you might feel like Zen, but the functionality is pretty much the same. What we do though is on the notifications, many times we, let's say a tile on the floor lights up and that's sort of like some notification. You don't know what the notification actually is until you click on it, but that gives us the option of being able to make suggestions, let's say based on your interests, because we will, we have an awareness of what your interests are, we can give you updates and things like that on events that are going on in the area, as well as people that may match with you that you wouldn't necessarily go looking for, because it's based on like, wow, they have, 5 of the same 20 by 20, here's a suggestion, things like that. So the other piece of it that I think is really important, as compared to a lot of other crisis hotlines, because our adult coaches are built into the app and they have awareness of what the app is doing, most places, really the idea is you're just listening to the user. So when they type in for help or support or things like that, you're really just echoing back kind of what's going on for them. You're really not allowed to give advice or anything like that from a liability standpoint. However, one of the things with Promly is because we have the app and we know there are local events going on, or there are other, resources, in like we built into our app, we can actually make those suggestions. So I know as a therapist, many times, I have to say to somebody probably 4 or 5 times, why don't you try this? Like, let's give it a go. Like your homework is to like reach out, like, what can you do? And so because we've built in that system of a lot of different support avenues. It's not like we're relying on one thing, but our goal is to give kids lots of opportunities to connect. And so even having the ability to look at what's going on for that kid in their environment in terms of, maybe there's an event on Friday, maybe there's an event on Saturday. Wow, it looks like there's, 50 kids going to blank, why don't you see if you can join that? Then we have that ability to kind of make those suggestions much more personal versus just a random pop-up or something like that.
I think that's absolutely awesome. And we definitely urge our listeners. I think it's something that's right now, there's a large need for it. So it's something that you should definitely check out. But right now I kind of wanted to just, shift away from Promly a little bit. And I think something that I really wanted to do while we had you on here was to really tap into, some of your expert knowledge for our listeners. And one thing that we've kind of, kept coming across in our talks is that, you know, a lot of times until you've gone through kind of your own mental health challenge, you don't really understand the value of reaching out to a peer necessarily. And I don't think you quite know understand how meaningful that can be to somebody who's kind of currently going through their own struggles. So I was wondering maybe if you could just kind of touch on that a little bit for our listeners, the value of peer-to-peer interaction. And I think too, maybe if there's a wrong way or the right way to reach out to somebody about their mental health and their mental well-being.
One of the things I would say that's a really great resource, and I don't know if you guys have touched on this at all, but there's a Ask Twice campaign. I think the Jed Foundation sponsors that. They're a great resource as well. But I do find it's one of these things, you kind of ask people, how are you doing? And then you ask again, but how are you doing really? It doesn't take much when you ask twice. Most people are fine. They're totally fine. I mean, look at them. They're fine. Look at their Instagram. It's fine. But it's not until you actually take the time to say, no, but like, really, how are you doing? Like, how do you feel? What's going on with this? What's going on with that? Like, I mean, I can tell you, and that's, I say this all the time, like, kids are struggling. There is no doubt. You can assume that if there's a kid in high school right now, they're probably, they might not struggle all the time, but they certainly know somebody who's struggling or they've struggled themselves. And so that idea of just assuming that there probably is something going on, or there probably is the potential for something going on. It's like, asking about your stress, like, where's your stress at? Where's, how's your mood doing? Like, what's going on with you? But it's really that, not being afraid to just, not just settle at I'm fine, but being able to push a little harder and be like, yeah, but so give me the details. What is going on for you? Tell me more, help me understand. Those are the kinds of, statements that kind of push a little bit without throwing somebody totally off.
I love that. And I think that, really appreciate your time and spending half an hour here with us. But sort of to wrap up, we'd like to, end on a little bit of a positive note and ask you, what does mental well-being look like to you from an adult's perspective, but also potentially from, a younger, high school student's perspective through your work?
So I would say I'm a big fan of Gen Z. I feel like I've gotten to work with so many interns with Promly, and I'm constantly inspired by the empathy that this generation has. It's really, and I would say, Generation Y as well. Like, I joke with my clients because I say, I can tell you right now, I don't think that the quarantine and, following the rules and all of that would be possible, but for the fact that, we have millennials and we have Gen Z really leading the charge in a lot of ways to demonstrate empathy and to really be in tune with what's going on, not just with themselves, but with other people. I find that to be a true generational shift. I'm probably, I'm a big fan of young people these days. But so when I look at like that ability, and I said this before, but Gen Z is considered the most empathetic, the most psychologically aware. They know to ask questions. And I do find that leads to a mental well-being. This idea of, assuming, hey, everybody goes through something sometime. We're normalizing a little bit to say it's not going to define you necessarily, but we can understand that we're all human. We all have challenges. We all make mistakes. Nobody's better than somebody else. We're not buying into the external measurements of success as these defining things. We're looking at connectedness as really being that way to understand yourself better and that way to understand other people better. So when we say mental well-being, I really do think it's that ability to get off the hamster wheel, get off the relying on those external measurements of success to define a person, but really being able to be in the moment and be connected and then be able to truly connect to other people in their moment. What that means then in terms of mental health is that ability to then connect based on whatever a person brings to the table. You can hear it. We don't have to deny it. Even if it's bad, we can still hear it. I think this generation, because they've been so overexposed, nothing surprises them. There's no they've had technology since they were about 9 or 10 years old. And so, the reality is, and from a strengths perspective, they really can sit with a lot and then be able to empower change both within themselves as needed and change within others. And I think that's, again, what we're seeing with social change. It's really exciting and empowering to see young people come together and be able to really promote each other and empathize with each other and really bring out the best in each other. And I do see that as the future. I think we're all going to be a little bit more mentally healthy as a result of all the changes this year, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I know I agree with you 100%. I think the kind of the empathy, specifically, I think towards some of these younger generations, as we've seen, adolescents are a little bit more open to having these discussions. But I think too, having individuals like yourself on this podcast, it's only gonna help to bring that discussion forward and continue to improve it. So, just on behalf of Nick and I just want to thank you so much for coming on to speak with us. I know I thoroughly enjoyed learning more about Promly, and I think our listeners will as well. So thank you.
Well, I thank you so much. I mean, I will say our MVP comes out in September. We'll test it throughout the fall. And then the hope is that with enough funding, we'll be nationally releasing in January. And so, certainly I'll keep you posted on the whereabouts of all of that. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen.